Michael Geller is an architect, a planner, a professor who has informed opinions about everything from public housing to tall, extremely tall, slim glass towers that dominate Vancouver. Metropolises and their role are one of his favorite topics. He is an urbanite at heart who designs and develops prestigious and practical properties. It is my pleasure to welcome Michael Geller back to Studio 4 to tell us more. It is metropolises, not metropoli.
I think it is metropolises.
I hope. It's not Latin, is it?
And opinionated, not necessarily informed.
Okay. Well, we like opinionated, don't we? And now you can be opinionated because
That's right.
you're a little older. As we get a little older, we get more opinionated, I find.
We often get wiser.
You think?
And it's often hard to explain to younger people why you think your opinions are more valid than perhaps theirs.
I know, but old is in. William Shatner on Broadway at 80. Christopher Plummer wins the big prize at 82.
So one of the questions, is it better to get old in a city, or is it better to get old in a small town, or maybe even in the country?
I'm sure you read, don't know if you've read, but I know you know about the book Triumph of the City, written by The Economist, where he says it's a good place to get old in the city. What do you think?
I would say, generally speaking, it is a good place. And indeed, we oftentimes look at new seniors complexes being built out in green fields, away from shops and services, and we often wonder, you know, is that really where I want to live when I get older? No, I think as a general rule, cities are a good place to live for many people, but especially for older people.
Yes, because as you downsize, perhaps you give up your car. Perhaps. Or perhaps you have to give up your car. But to be able to walk to theater and restaurants and to have a little bit of buzz around you when you're older and perhaps isolated?
It's one of the big topics right now in planning literature, whether or not people prefer to live in walkable neighborhoods where they don't have to drive their car, as an alternative to perhaps living in a more suburban location, but where they could have a house with a yard, the traditional white picket fence, and so forth. And I think the truth is, some people still want to be out in a suburban location. They want a house. They don't want to be in Yale Town. There's other people for whom downtown living, even if they have children, is an exciting option.
Sure. Jane Jacobs, visionary geographer, as you know, was about density and neighborhood, mixed-use housing, all of that. How are we doing in Vancouver, in your opinion?
Well, I should clarify, Jane Jacobs once used to live behind where I lived in Toronto, and she didn't live on the 35th floor of a glass tower. She did live in a very nice sort of urbane duplex type of structure on Albany, if I recall properly. I think we are beginning to offer more choices in Vancouver, but we're not offering enough choices, especially for those older people we were talking about a few minutes ago who want to remain in their neighborhood but don't necessarily want a larger house. And many of those people say, you know what, I'm ready to perhaps have a townhouse or a duplex. And it's interesting, in Vancouver, we tend not to build those.
Because of the property prices, or why?
It's a combination of factors. And in fact, I'm involved right now with the Mayor's Housing Affordability Task Force. And one of the things we're looking at is how does the form of housing impact its affordability? And one of the things that I often hear is, I'd be interested in moving into a townhouse, but I don't want to be part of a strata corporation. I don't want somebody telling me what vegetables I can grow and what flowers and what color to paint my door. One of the housing options that I think many people would like is the townhouse, but individually owned.
That would be great.
And that's coming to Vancouver soon.
Is that the Canada House, perhaps? I was reading, I saw an ad in the paper, Canada House at the Village on Falls Creek, 60 homes on the water, it says. Don't know what it's about, inspired by Arthur Erickson.
Yes.
Bet you know about it.
I do know about it. It's one of the last remaining buildings to be sold at the Olympic Village. And you're not on the ground, but you are going to be up in the air, and you are going to have a phenomenal view looking across Falls Creek.
Okay, well, they fooled me, because
Yes.
when they said 60 homes, I think of a home as on the ground. Don't know why.
The marketers often have more impact on the way our cities look and the way we think about our cities than the architects and the developers and home builders.
Vancouver City Planner Brent Todderin, no longer the planner. How do you feel about his impact on this city, where he could take this city if he was still there, where the new planner should take the city?
Well, I think Brent has set a new direction for the city. One of the things that he was very proud of was the fact that it was during his tenure that the Laneway House became a reality. The idea of having a, if you like, a cottage in the backyard where a family member could live or where you could rent it out, that's something that he made happen. And I once had an argument with him because I said, you know, you should maybe just do a few of these and test it out. He said, no, we're going to rezone the city to allow this to happen. And indeed, I think he may well have been right. The other thing he's going to do is change Cambie Corridor, and ultimately that will change other arterial streets. Because although if you go down Cambie today, you see all those old 60s bungalows, in 10 years you're going to see mid-rise buildings that make you feel like you're in Barcelona or in a European city, not Vancouver.
Well, you were quoted in the paper as suggesting that if you've been to Asia and you come back to Vancouver, you feel a bit like a farm kid.
That's right.
Well, they said you felt like a kid in a cornfield, but right. I doubt you have ever said that.
Well, I mean, it is an interesting thing. I've been amused by the discussion over the signs, the electronic billboards on BC Place and the people who are complaining about them. And people complained about the electronic billboards at the end of the bridges on native land. I love going to Asian cities where the whole downtown is an electronic billboard, where if you've been to Shanghai, and I wore this tie especially for you, Fanny, because I bought it in Shanghai. Shanghai has 50, 60-story buildings where the whole building is like a television screen, and it's changing all the time. And I find it very, very exciting.
It's exciting, but if you live across from one of those big screens, what about light pollution? How do you go to sleep at night when things are blinking and
you buy drapes
winking?
With blackout drapes.
I see.
When you don't
what
want
about
to
your
sleep,
view?
Your view is part of the excitement. And indeed, when I was involved in developing the Bayshore project, half of those units have dramatic views looking out across the water to the North Shore Mountains, and half of those units had what we called the city view. And there were a lot of people who deliberately chose a south-facing unit with a view over the city rather than a north-facing view unit.
Now, when you're talking about big screens, would they be projection screens that are retractable? They can be there or not be there? Would they be advertising screens? Would they be art?
Well, they can be all of that. And indeed, anybody who's been to Hong Kong knows that in the summer, the whole city becomes a light show. And it's a phenomenal piece of art. Buildings, again, have signs. Yes, some of it is advertising, but that's not a new phenomenon. At my home, I have a painting that my father-in-law did in the 50s of Piccadilly Circus. And it's wonderful to look at the signs, you know, that were big then, most of which are companies that are no longer with us. I mean, we've often had neon signs, bright lights.
Yes.
And indeed, bright lights, big city, the words go together.
And bright lights in rainy city. The magic of neon in this city, if you look at any of the Fred Herzog photos, you know, driving down gravel with the one when in the neon world was exciting. I have a painting in my house. What would I call it? An event, an Owen Kidd, and you turn it on. It's a screen, and you turn the art on and off, and part of the art moves. It's wild.
There's a building not far from here which caused a great deal of consternation because the city asked, as part of its public art contribution, to consider doing something special. And indeed, it has illuminations all the way up and down the building. And again, people who live across it are upset. And I can understand why they're upset. They didn't expect that. But it is, I think, part of an emerging trend that we're going to see.
Okay, and I would consider it art, but somebody else might not consider it art. They just consider it irritating, even if the artist is famous and all of that. And you really have to change your lens if you can. But I understand if you're walking around your house at night and you're seeing blue and red and green and not liking that, and you didn't know it was coming. And hence, when you buy something downtown, who do you go to say, okay, I'm in the lovely Shaw Tower? Will they ever build a, well, apparently not right there because there's a convention center. But you know what I mean. Who will cut my view off if I have a lovely view of the harbor? Are they going to put in another plane?
Fanny, it's a very interesting question. In Singapore, in the heart of the city, they have a 5-story building which is like an urban museum. And one of the features on one of the floors is a model of the city. And every time you do a new development, you're required to make a little maquette of your building and you put it into this framework. But it also shows what buildings are planned to come next or what buildings might come next. And in fact, one of the conversations that is taking place right now is whether Vancouver should have an overall plan so that you know that there's likely to be buildings up to 30 stories here and buildings up to 4 stories here. Right now, it really is a bit of hit and miss.
Well, see, I don't like that because I like a plan. However, I know you have to be flexible with the plan, and you know that because that's what you do. But if we got a fairly good idea, you get a bit better sense of where you want it to live. Do I want to live where the float planes are taking off and landing or not?
Yeah.
Is that always going to be here, or is it going to be over there? Which apparently it is now. It's in both places.
We all know that things are going to change. You know, the only thing that is certain is uncertainty. But the fact is, I support the idea of developing neighborhood plans. And yes, they can vary with the support of the neighborhood, but that generally set a direction for if not forever, at least for the next decade.
Okay, and if you retire downtown, you don't have to worry about working downtown and living downtown, but that is a trend, and there aren't as many head offices in Vancouver as there used to be. So when we come back, let's talk about commercial space and private space.
Yes.
Okay. Michael Geller, our guest, he's an architect, he's a planner, he's a real estate expert, and he's an adjunct professor.